In this screencast, I will demonstrate how to use a couple of utilities to convert an RGB image created in Inkscape to a CMYK image. I will be using version 0.47. First, I must apologize for taking so long to screencast this episode. I thought that this was going to be a very simple episode at first, but as I got into my research for CMYK, I quickly discovered that I needed a few lessons in color management, and that's when things spun out of control. As time went by, I kept wanting to discuss more and more things, and before I knew it, I was gearing up for a supermassive episode on color management before I could even get into what I wanted to discuss in the first place. So maybe I'll save the topic of color management for some future episodes and just go back to the basics and keep this episode as simple as possible. My intention for this screencast is to show you a very basic workflow for converting an exported Inkscape RGB image to CMYK. We cannot do this directly from Inkscape yet, so I will use some third-party and cross-platform utilities which are freely available to handle the conversion. So why would one want to convert to CMYK in the first place? Well, let's say that you've designed a spectacular looking banner and you need to get it printed. It may be required of you to prepare your image for people who will be printing it. It helps to understand the difference between RGB and CMYK. RGB, red, green, and blue, is mostly meant for displaying an image on a device with a digital screen, such as like your computer monitor or your television or your mobile phone. It's an additive color model, meaning that it combines reds, blues, and greens to make up all the colors in its color range or gamut. CMYK, on the other hand, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, is meant for color printing, such as offset printing, for instance. It's a subtractive color model, meaning that it tries to take cyan, magenta, yellow, and black inks combined to make all of the colors in its color range. And you can see from this image here, the RGB is the solid line, the CMYK color range is the dotted line. So you can see that RGB has more colors. CMYK cannot produce colors in this area here unless you're using something like maybe spot colors, which I won't get into at the moment. So in other words, RGB is meant for on-screen viewing, whereas CMYK is meant for printing. If you need a thorough understanding of the two, then you can pop over to Wikipedia and plug in RGB and CMYK. I assume you know a little bit about both, so I'm just going to give you the bottom line more or less. Plus, if you wish to know more, then you can ask questions in the comment section on this particular episode on our website. You must be made aware that converting from one color space to another is not exact. This means that some of the bright and vibrant colors that you chose to work with in Inkscape are going to end up a little duller on the CMYK conversion, since those colors might not be available. This is because RGB has a larger range of colors to choose from than the CMYK version. Being able to review your CMYK image or the color range before sending it to your printer service can help if you decide you need to tweak your colors. Fortunately, Inkscape has some of those built-in on-screen proofing features using color profiles, so you don't have to export, convert, review, and do that over and over again until you get something acceptable. Unfortunately, it doesn't work so well in Ubuntu, but it seems to work just fine in Windows. So I don't know if it's a bug with Inkscape or if it's just a bug with my particular Linux distribution. So your mileage may vary on those features. But, you know, not to worry, because the third-party utilities that I'll be showing you, those are just as easy. So, all right. So now that you know a little bit about RGB and CMYK and why it might be necessary to work with both of those color models, let me get into Inkscape and make an example image so we have something to work with. I'll be working with ICC color profiles, so if you don't have any, then you can freely download those from Adobe. And you can get those in either Windows, Macintosh, or Linux. I think the Linux link might be broken right at the moment. So for the Linux people out there, you can grab the Windows version. I think these are all just zip files. The Linux version might be a tarball or something, but you just grab the Windows one, you can unzip it, and a good spot to put it in Ubuntu is the user share color ICC directory. Inkscape can find it there. Now, there are several other places that you can put that where Inkscape can find it, but I'm not going to go into, all 5 places. I'll also post a link in the episode notes too, so since I'm not showing it here. So you want to make sure that you install some ICC profiles. And by the way, I think Ubuntu, if you just do a search for ICC in your software manager, I think it'll pop up a couple options, and you can get some base versions there. Since I'm in the US, I'll be using standard RGB for my input, and I'll be using swap. I think it's version 2 for the CMYK output. I think that's kind of a North American standard rather than the ISO standards that the Europeans and the rest of the world are used to. Okay, so let's get into Inkscape here and set up this document. Okay, let me first move my my key status monitor up in here so we can see it. We're going to make an example image. It really doesn't matter what I make here, but I'm going to make something kind of small to start out with. So I'm going to go to File, Document Properties. I'm going to set my background color to a full white. I don't want to use any transparencies. I will also set my units to inches. I will set my document size. Well, let's see here. We're going to set our units to inches here. And I'm going to set my document size to 3 inches by 3 inches. Okay, and we'll leave our page border on. Okay, and that gets us something a little bit smaller. We'll zoom in on that. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is we have this rather handy utility. Let me see here. It is in, let me look for it. It is in Extensions, Render, and it's called Printing Marks. And you can't quite see it because my screencasting border is cut off. But we'll be using that in just a moment. Typically what I like to do is set up my document manually with the use of guides. The printing marks dialog box doesn't really go beyond 1 or 2 decimal places, and that kind of bothers me because I really want to use 1/8 of an inch as my border. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. What I want to do first, though, is I'm going to put some guides around my border here. So I'm going to go to, let's see if we can find it here. I always forget where it is. Okay, objects to, no, that's not where I want. I want to put it around the page. Guides around page. Okay, that'll put some guides here. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. Okay, and I also want to put some guides. I want to put a guide out here 1/8 of an inch all the way around, and I want to put in a margin which is 1/8 of an inch to the inside. Okay, so what I'm going to do is first I'm going to draw a square, and I want to snap that to my guides. And I'm going to change this to inches here. Okay, that is a perfect 3 inch by 3 inch square. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I am going to make this, let's see, 3.25. And I'm going to center this on my page. By the way, drawing that at 3 inches by 3 inches was just for reference. I didn't really need it. Okay, and I'm going to duplicate this. We're going to change its color. And I'm going to move it in here anywhere. It doesn't matter where I put it. And I'm going to make this 2.75 inches by 2.75 inches. And I want to center that on my page. And I'll show you what I'm going to do here. I'm going to take this blue square, which will act as my bleed cutoff line here, and I'm going to go to Object, Objects to Guides, and I'm going to take this green square, which will act as my margin. We'll do the same thing, Objects to Guides. Okay, now that sets up my document here, so I know what to draw, and I've got borders. Okay, and I'll explain that in detail in just a minute. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to Extensions, I'm going to go to Render, and I'm going to go to Printing Marks. Okay, now this is where we can set this thing up for crop marks and bleed marks. I'm going to turn off registration marks and color bars for now, star target, and page information. You have the option of flipping all that stuff on, but really all I want right now are bleed marks and crop marks for the printer. That shows them that that gives them kind of like crosshairs for cutting the page, so it's big enough. Okay, and for positioning, I'm going to use inches here, and I'm going to set this all to 0.1. Now, this is what bothers me about this utility, is that it doesn't go beyond 1 decimal place. And I would like it to at least go to 2 decimal places. Maybe that's a limit in Inkscape, or maybe it's a limit in just this utility, but something a little bit more accurate would be nice. Okay, we'll set that up for the canvas, and we'll hit Apply. Okay, now let me turn off my guides. We can see these printer marks here. Okay, let me zoom in here. Now basically what we have is we have a bleed crosshair or a cutting line that when we're drawing our artwork, we want to make sure that our artwork extends to this bleed line, and then this line here just represents where our page is. Okay, so what I'm going to do, those bleed lines get created on a layer, and the layer is locked, and I'm going to go ahead and move those for now. So we're going to open up our layers, and we're going to go to our printing marks, and we're going to unlock that. Okay, now we can take these things, and you can see that we can move those. What I'm going to do is ungroup them. Okay, and I'm going to leave these lines alone because they are where I want them. We're going to go back and turn on our guides. Now remember, when I set up these bleed lines, they were set to 0.1, but when I drew my actual bleed lines, I drew that as 0.125, which is 1/8. So I'm going to go ahead and take these lines here. I'm going to group this, and I'm going to snap those to my guidelines. Got to take each one of these and group them. And again, if you're happy with how the bleed lines work and everything, that's fine. Personally, I just think we need to give it just a little extra work. Okay, so now if we shut off our guidelines, we can see that we have a proper page border here, and then we have bleed lines. Okay, so now let's draw something. Let's just, and it doesn't really matter what I draw. I'm just going to use something as an example. I'll turn my guides back on. And what I'm going to draw is, let's see here. We'll draw a square here. And I think this needs to be about 1.5 by 1.5. Let's see if I'm right here. And again, I'm snapping that to the corner of my very outside guideline. And I'm going to duplicate this. Okay, and that wasn't quite right. Let's try 1.75. Okay, and I'm trying to do the math on the whim here. Give this a different color. Okay, I think that's what I want. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. We'll push this out, and I'll duplicate this one, and we'll push this out. Okay, and we'll change all these colors here. Let's make this red. We'll make this yellow. We'll make this green. So maybe we'll have something like that. Let's do full black here. Okay, let's do something like this. Red, green, blue, and black. Okay, now this is what I want to explain with my guidelines. Okay, let's say, for example, this was the image, the very image that I wanted to get printed. Okay, now I'm drawing in Inkscape in RGB. That's the only thing that you can do in Inkscape. Well, I take that back. You can use other color models actually to draw in, but Inkscape only exports to RGB. Okay, so if I'm drawing something and I want to get this thing printed, I've created a margin line here, okay? And within the margin, if I were to add text, I would want to keep that within this inside margin, because anything beyond gets a little bit too close to the cutting area here. Now, my page here, this second margin that goes all the way around, that is what is going to get trimmed, okay? So we have a bleed line on the very outside. We want to make sure that our artwork bleeds over our cutting area here. If we draw exactly to the size that's going to get cut, what can happen is your printing service that prints this thing might not get that quite right, and it might cut a pixel or two outside of the cutting crosshairs, and then you end up with something that's white on your artwork, and that's not right. So if you want to draw, or if you want to get something printed, it's typical for you to bleed that past your cutting line, and then if you're going to add information, then it's typical to add a 1/8 of an inch margin to the inside where you can keep all your artwork in there. So that's why we do those things. Okay, and then when we turn off our guides, your printing service, whoever you pick, when they print this thing out, these like registration lines, I guess, will be printed along with it, and that tells them that, you know, we can cut along this area here and we get what we want. So that's why we do those things. Again, that's not really something that you have to do. That's just something that I would do if I was going to get my artwork printed. Okay, so this is the image that I want to get printed, and again, I'm using a solid white background. I'm not using transparencies because eventually I want to convert this. I want to convert my my PNG image to a TIFF, and TIFF doesn't handle transparencies, so that's why we do those things. Okay, so now that I have this drawn, before I do the conversion and export this thing out, I want to explain a little bit of color management in Inkscape. So what I'm going to do is go to Inkscape Preferences, and we are going to go to, let me roll up Tools and go to Color Management. Okay, and I also want to make sure that I pick this here. Okay, now Color Management in Inkscape. We have this now, and it does work, but under Ubuntu it works kind of. Okay, now what we have here, what you want to do is for your display profile, I actually have my screen profile in here. That's what you want. Let me back up a little bit. Before you really get into color management, you really ought to calibrate your monitor, and you know, that will calibrate all of your devices too, and we do that with a device called a colorimeter. Now, what I've done in Linux is I've purchased a Spider 3. I think it's a Spider Express or something like that. It's a relatively low-cost colorimeter. It works well with Ubuntu using Argyle, which happens to be a color management, or not just a color management utility, but also something that can help you set that up. Now, Ubuntu does have a color management module that you can install that will manage colors across your operating system if applications don't do that. Again, I don't really want to get into color management for this episode because it's a big topic. I'm still kind of a newbie at it. But I did realize that color management is very, very important. And it's really opened my eyes. But again, I really don't want to get into it, you know, in this particular screencast because, you know, I'd be recording for a couple hours. But anyways, Inkscape does have some color management. It'll ask you for, you know, your display profile. If you have one, you can plug that in. It can retrieve your profile from the display, display rendering intent, perceptual, and then you have a device profile here for output. And this is where you would plug in the CMYK-ICC profile that your printer wants to use. Now, I'm using kind of a default US web-coded swap version 2. That's kind of a North American standard for printing. And I'm using it as a generic ICC profile. When you pick a printer service, you'll want to use their ICC profile. So if it's, you know, someprintingservice.com, you're making a business card or a banner or something, you just ask them for their ICC profile. They'll provide it for you, and that's what you would want to plug in here because we want to convert our Inkscape standard RGB image to their particular color profile, which, you know, handles all the colors in their gamut. What's really neat about this utility here in Inkscape is that it applies proofing. So when you design something in your standard RGB colors, you can toggle this proofing switch on and off, and you can actually see the conversion happen right on the screen. So if I pick that, it'll take just a second or two, and then my image would convert. However, this doesn't work right now under Ubuntu. And it's been several versions of Ubuntu where it hasn't worked. So I don't know if that's something with my particular Linux distribution or if it's a bug in Inkscape. At work, I use Windows and it works flawlessly at work. So I can be designing something in Inkscape and I can hit simulate output on screen and it works flawlessly. It converts my image for me. Well, it doesn't convert it, but it just lets me proof what the colors are going to look like, and I can tweak there. I don't have to, convert the image, view it, and then come back in and tweak later. So I'm not sure why that's not working at the moment. So I just wanted to explain that to you guys so you have the option of using that. But I'm just going to kind of gloss over it at the moment since it's not quite working for me. Okay? Okay, so back to what I want to do. I'm all done with my artwork and I want to print this now. Okay, so typically what I would do is save my document. So I'm going to do that first. I'm going to do a save as, and I'm going to save this to my desktop. Now I'll just call this RGB. This is my RGB image. And I'm going to go ahead and export my image. Okay, and you always want to make sure that when you're exporting your image to be printed that you're using 300 dpi. Now there are some printing services that say 150 is fine, but I like to get it, the resolution way up there. So I'm going to go ahead and export that, and I want to get my drawing, so that gets everything. If I just hit my page, these lines here will be cropped off, and I don't want that. I want to get my drawing so the printing service sees these crop lines around here. Okay, so let's go ahead and export. And then let's take a look at this image. It'll be very big, but I'm going to have to skew this down, get this into my window here. Okay, so here's my exported image. So I've got a white background around here with my cut lines for the printing service. So now when they print this thing off, they'll see everything here, and they can cut this along these solid lines. Okay? And then the dotted, that just shows them that we used a bleed line. Okay? So that's what the image will look like. All right, so now that we've made our sample image, let's go on to the next step, and let's try converting this thing. Alright, now the first utility that we're going to look at is ImageMagick. Now I've used ImageMagick before in previous screencasts. ImageMagick is free, and it's a batching utility that I like to use often. For the Linux people, I think ImageMagick is in most repos, so you can just sudo apt-get install Inkscape. Or I'm sorry, not Inkscape, ImageMagick. For those on Windows and probably Macintosh, you can grab that by going to this particular website, which is the ImageMagick website, and find the binary releases and pick whatever you want there and get that thing installed. ImageMagick works along with Inkscape, so I always kind of consider them going hand in hand. But you can use ImageMagick standalone to do all kinds of conversions and add effects to images. So I really like using it. So let's take a look at how we convert this with ImageMagick and how we use ICC profiles. First of all, let's back up a little bit, and I've already got an image, an RGB.png image that I exported out of Inkscape. So let's take a look at what ImageMagick tells me about this image. Now, what I have here, I'm just going to paste these things in rather than type them out, but I'm using the identify ImageMagick utility to give me the color space of this particular image. Okay, if I were to clip off this pipe grep color space, it'll give me a lot of information about it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Oh, let me back up, I mean. And if I hit enter here, it's going to give me all kinds of information on this PNG file that I exported out. It tells me that it is an RGB image. It tells me it's an 8-bit image. Tells me lots of things here, but really what we're most interested in is this color space right here. Now what I can do, you see here that if I add the pipe grep color space : it'll strip out all of this information that I don't particularly care about and just give me the color space only. So that's kind of handy there. Okay, so that just confirms that we have an RGB image. Now, how do we convert that to CMYK? Well, let's take a look. Let me go ahead and clear this out. And let me paste in a brand new command. And I'll explain what's going on. Now, the main image magic command or utility is called convert. Okay, so what we're telling Image Magic to do is we're telling it to use convert to convert my RGB image, which I have a full path here. It's sitting on my desktop. And I'm telling it to use a profile, an input profile. I'm using the standard RGB color space profile.icm. That's pretty much what Inkscape uses as its color space. Now, I could be wrong about that. I think Inkscape uses what's called standard RGB, but in my tests, I can't find a difference between that particular color space and this color space right here. So this is the color space that you'll get when you download the Adobe ICC profiles. That's one of them that you'll get. And I'm using that as my input, and I'm telling it to convert my inputted RGB color space to this US web-coded swap ICC. Okay? And since PNG files cannot handle the CMYK color space, I have to convert it to a format that does handle it. I think JPEG, TIFF, PDF, those formats handle it. So what I'm going to do is convert my RGB PNG to a CMYK TIFF file. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here, and that takes just a few seconds, and on my desktop I should have a converted image, and that's what you see here. Now at home, when you're looking at this image, you might not see the difference in colors that I would see here. We can verify that that worked by using the same command that we used before, the identify command. And let me just back up on that, and we want to identify the file called CMYK.TIF. Okay, and when I hit enter there, it should tell me that now the color space is converted from RGB to CMYK. So let's take a look at that again. And this time I'm going to get rid of this grep color space. We'll hit enter here so we can see all of the information now. Let me drill down here. Okay, so now it tells us that when we take a look at this RGB-CMYK TIFF file, that it's now a CMYK image. Okay, so it's that simple. And again, I wish I could show that to you as you're viewing this, but you might not see the actual color conversion. Basically, I've used reds. What did I use on my image here? Let's go ahead and open this up and take a look. I used red, green, blue, and black. Now, reds do a very good job of converting. They get just a little bit duller. Greens and blues, I used very bright colors here. That means my CMYK image is going to get duller on those colors. And black sometimes gets a little duller also. But that's because, you know, when you're working with the RGB color model, you have more colors. So that means you can choose colors that are brighter than what CMYK has to offer. Now, what's neat about Inkscape is you remember when I got into the Preferences tab, and we can proof that on screen. We can also turn on what is out of gamut, or what is out of the color range. So let's go ahead and take a look at that here. If I check this mark out of gamut colors and then check this simulate output on screen, it'll convert every color that's not in the CMY color space to this color here. And you can change that color to anything, but it kind of gives you a visual check of what it can't do in CMYK space. Okay. So that's kind of handy to have also. Again, I don't really want to get into a lot of the color management stuff, because what I want to show is just how to convert an RGB image to CMYK, because that's what you're interested in. You've asked Richard and I to provide a screencast to do that, and hopefully I was counting on Richard to maybe man this screencast, because he has actual experience doing it. He's provided images for the Southeast Linux Fest, and I know those images had gotten printed out, and he had to convert that beforehand, and I think he used maybe GIMP with the separate plugin, which is another way of doing it. We can also use Scribus. I mean, there's a number of ways that we can use free and open source software to convert RGB images to CMYK. The two that I'm showing happen to be pretty cross-platformy. Even though GIMP and Scribus are just as cross-platform, but they're more graphic. They're more graphic programs, and I just wanted to show you how to use some command line tools. Okay. All right. Now, even though I want to show you a command line tool, the next tool I'm going to show you happens to be a GUI tool. But okay, so we've converted this image to RGB, or I'm sorry, to CMYK, and it happens to be a TIFF file. Now, what if you want this TIFF file converted to a PDF? Maybe somebody needs a PDF instead of a TIFF. Well, we can do that too. Let's open up let me clear this off here. Let's convert that TIFF file that we just made to a PDF file. And we can do that with ImageMagick just as well. Let me paste that in. And basically what we're telling it to do is we're telling it to grab the TIFF file and then just convert it to a PDF. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here. And now we have a PDF file sitting on my desktop. I'll go ahead and open that up. Okay, and there you see the CMYK conversion. Now again, I'm hoping that you can see that. Let me open up my PNG file here. Now you see one is RGB, one is CMYK. Take a look at the greens. I don't know if you can see that at home or not, but on my screen I can see the conversion just fine. We have a duller green over here, we have a vibrant green over here. We have a little duller red over here, brighter red over here, and we have duller blue over here, and we have brighter blue over here. That's the difference with CMYK. Okay, Alright, so I've showed you how to use ImageMagick to convert our standard RGB PNG file to a CMYK TIFF and to a CMYK PDF. You can use ImageMagick's identify command or utility to check it to make sure your color space is correct, but that's really all it takes to convert it. Okay, so let's take a look at another tool. I'll go ahead and close this out. And I want to look at another tool called CMYK tool. Now this is a graphic tool that I really enjoy using. It works, it's cross-platform, works in Windows, Linux, Macintosh, and this is done by the same developer who made the separator or the separation plugin for GIMP. It's all the same stuff, but this just happens to be a separate program. Okay, so you can grab that from Black 5 Imaging, and I'll provide the link in the notes of the episode, and you see that it does. It'll save out as a JPEG, TIFF, 8-bit and 16-bit with or without embedded profile. So it's kind of a handy tool. Let's see how that works. Okay, so let's open up CMYK tool. Okay, and there's not much about it. What I'm going to do is drag in my RGB PNG image. This thing is drag and drop, and we see from the little icon here that it's RGB. Whenever you see 4 colors in a checker board pattern, that tells you that it's a CMYK image. When you see 3 bars here, that tells you that it's an RGB image. Okay, so this is my image that I want to convert. Now, what you can do here, if you've done a conversion, CMYK tool will use the previous conversion by default to convert that. If you've never set up your CMYK tool before, then you want to pick Other here. And you want to tell it to pick an input profile, which is our standard RGB profile for input. And you want to tell it to use an output profile, which happens to be the US web-coded swap profile that I'm using. Again, if you're using a particular printer service, you want to get their ICC color profile. They will probably provide that for you. If they do not, then US web-code. If you're in the United States or Canada, North America, then that's a good generic to start with. Okay, and then you can, provide rendering intent and conversion mode. And you can also, once you make the conversion, you can also embed the profile into the particular TIFF or JPEG file. So when you're sending that to somebody, if they have color management installed and running on their particular system, then they'll be able to view that image properly. Okay, so that's what you have to do, and then you can go ahead and save that and give it a name. I've already done that ahead of time and made one called RGB to CMYK. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that's highlighted. You can make the conversion either by double-clicking on this image or just hit Convert. And it'll go ahead and convert your image for you. And I can't spread this out all the way so you can see it, but I can make this a little bit bigger. And you can see on screen here that I have my CMYK image. Now, I don't know if you can compare that with the original, but you can see that my colors now have been converted, and I've got duller colors. And it tells you down here, if I click on this, down at the bottom I have a status bar. It tells me my CMYK units here. And when I'm done and I want to save this thing, I can save it wherever I want. Okay, so now I'm going to call this thing RGB CMYK. I'm going to save this particular image as an 8-bit TIFF. I can choose whatever resolution I want. Maybe I want to use 300 here. I can choose to embed the ICC profile if I wish. I'm going to go ahead and leave that, and I'm going to hit save. Okay, and I just wrote that out, and that's how easy it is to use this particular utility. And what's great about this utility is you can just load up a bunch of images right on this left side here and convert them all, save them out. And you can try different profiles. There's a preferences here where you can add, or where it will look for particular color profiles. These are some other areas here. Like I said before, when you have proper color management with a calibrated monitor, then your color management utilities and tools will want to know, like, your color profile. Which color profile are you using? Well, this happens to be the color profile that I'm using, because my color profile has now, my monitor has now been calibrated. Okay, we also have some external utilities, some Argyle utilities that you can use as well. So CMYK tool, it's very handy. I love it. It's very simple. Image Magic, very handy, very simple. You know, but Image Magic requires some text input. I have a very poor memory. I make a lot of typos. I misspell things. So when I'm working with Image Magic, I always save out these little script files and run them back. Image Magic will allow you to batch convert any number of images. So that's what's great about that. And CMYK tool, it's just a nice little visual utility and allows you to convert RGB to CMYK, and it's that great. It's very simple. Okay, so that's how we convert RGB to CMYK. That's a very simple workflow for you, and you always want to keep in mind that a proper conversion involves ICC profiles or color profiles. That's the proper way of doing it. So again, I've only illustrated two utilities: Image Magic, CMYK tool. In Linux, there is a plethora of tools to choose from. There is also Scribus. You can import your SVG Inkscape file into Scribus and convert that to a CMYK file. But you have to note that Scribus does not handle the full Inkscape RGB file. So if you've added effects, some of those effects won't transfer over. Some of your text doesn't transfer over very well. So you don't have to use the SVG file, I guess. You could export that as a PNG and then import the PNG into Scribus and use that to convert. You can also use GIMP. Open up your 300 dpi PNG file in GIMP. Use the separation plugin, which you can find online. That works great. I love that. And what's nice about GIMP too is it does on-screen proofing just like Inkscape. So, you know, you don't even need to do your separation. You can just see online or on screen how your file will convert. So GIMP does an excellent job there. Still, it'd be nice if you could, you know, export files out of GIMP directly in CMYK. But you know, I can't blame GIMP for that so much, because you know Inkscape doesn't do that either. But Inkscape, I think, is going to get there. I think they're making improvements for version 0.48, which is due out pretty soon. We'll probably have some more features there. On the proprietary side, if you're using Adobe Illustrator or Adobe InDesign, if you can bring in your PNG Inkscape image into those programs, you can export as a CMYK file, probably a TIFF or JPEG or PDFs. Corel Draw, Zara. There are just lots of things that you can use to do this. There is also, I think it's called TIFF ICC, which happens to be a utility that you can grab that's cross-platform as well. There are loads of little utilities that you can use. So that's basically the workflow. Okay, so you design something in Inkscape, export it out as a 300 dpi PNG file, convert it with your favorite conversion tool, which maybe that's ImageMagick or CMYK tool, and then send it off to your printing service, and they'll print it for you. And hopefully everything will work out well. Now, I understand that I've glossed over a lot of the color management. I've made some assumptions that maybe some of you understand the RGB and the CMYK argument. I'm not an expert. I don't typically print anything off ever, like as in offset printing. Most of the stuff that I draw when I print it out on a color printer, I just assume that the color printer that I have on my desktop is doing all the conversion for me, and it looks great. Okay, so you don't have to do CMYK conversion just usually for your desktop printer. The conversion, that particular conversion, is meant for offset printing. Okay, where they're taking separate colors, they're separating all the colors and then inking over it to make the final image. Again, I'm rather new at this. I'm rather new at the CMYK thing. I don't do that. When I make the majority of my graphics, they're meant to be viewed on a monitor. So I really don't have to worry about the CMYK space so much. So if I've made any mistakes, if there are people out there who know more than I do, which I'm sure there's a bunch of you, please, give me your tips. Put them in our comment section. That's great. If you can help me out and help our viewers out, then please provide information. So I hope that what I've shown is something that you can use. I know a lot of you guys have asked Richard and I to do a CMYK episode. I hope this has been sufficient. But that's how you convert to CMYK. And I understand that I've done things kind of on the generic route, and I haven't really explained a proper color profile from a printing service. But I just wanted to show that it's not difficult to convert. That's the process. So you can take the process and tweak it, make it better, make it do things that you want to do. Hopefully the scripts that I've written in ImageMagick are correct. But again, if there's somebody out there that knows better, then please tell me where I've gone wrong, and our viewers will only benefit from it. So that's it. So thank you for watching this episode. I'm He the Next.